Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today's session on accelerating sustainable value chains. On this issue, the challenge that lies before us is enormous. I read a report by BCG and HSBC which shows that nearly 80% of the planet's carbon emissions can be traced to global value chains. And then more than 90% of the firms in these global value chains are actually SMEs. Now, many of these supply chains are actually led by MNCs, and that's part of the reason why it's important for us to listen to what our business leaders are going to be saying on this issue today. Research also shows that supply chain emissions are almost 11.4 times higher than operational emissions. And there are additional complexities that we need to deal with, those of forced labor, minimum wages that are paid, and workers working exceptionally long hours, which leads to health issues and other problems. So new ideas are really needed in terms of industry practice and policy cooperation to leverage value chains for sustainable development. Today, we are here to discuss what strategies, policies, and partnerships can help manufacturing companies accelerate the transition to sustainable value chains. Joining me for today's discussion is Ms. Arantxa Gonzalez-Laya, Dean of the Paris School of International Affairs, Institut Études Politiques, and former Executive Director of the International Trade Center. We have with us Mr. Ronald Busch, President and CEO of Siemens. We have Mr. Enrique Lorez, President and CEO of HP. And of course, Mr. Martin Lundstedt, President and CEO of Volvo. Between the three of them, we are going to be covering sectors that deal with several supply chain issues. So how about I begin with you, Arantxa? Before I begin, let me just remind everyone who signed on online that when you're communicating on social media, could you use the hashtag WEF22 in all your communications, please? So Arantxa, let me turn to you. You have a very rich experience in working on the sustainable trade and value chains with both public and private sectors. So what potential do you see to leverage value chains for sustainable development?
Thank you very much, Shefali. Yes, I've seen this from both ends. I've seen this from the public sector, from the regulatory side, let's say at the international level, from the World Trade Organization, from the United Nations. But I'm also seeing it from the private sector. I advise a company that is active in food markets, Danone, to include, as an independent advisor, to include this sustainability criteria into the business operation. And for me, the biggest hit of this is the transformative impact that embedding sustainability into the business, the core business, can have not only for the companies, and I'm sure that the companies will speak about that themselves, but also for their suppliers, for the consumers, and for society at large. So what we have here is a possibility to transform the way in which our economy works, but doing it from the core of the business, not just as an afterthought, not just as a good to have, but as from the point of view of businesses who understand that this can be a source of competitiveness as well as social goods. So that, I think, is what the beginning of this conversation, I guess, is about.
So based on the interactions you've been having with business leaders and all, what is the reality today? Is it still an afterthought and not really part of the core operations yet?
No, I think if I look at the last 20 years, I think this issue is moving closer and closer to the core of the companies. And there are very few out there that now consider this as an afterthought, mostly because considering it as an afterthought doesn't deliver results. And in a world that is becoming much more transparent, where transparency is a bigger requirement, whether within the company, with shareholders, and with the broader community, if you're not doing this as the core of your business, it shows. And it just doesn't work.
Got it. Let me turn to our CEOs today and get their views on the issue. What I'd like to ask you is, why don't you share your information on the advances that are happening in your industry on this issue? Let me begin with you, Ron.
Yeah, thank you. And just let me come back to the question we're talking about. Is, of course, sustainable supply chain is not only about using less energy, it's also using less resources. It's respecting local and labor law. It's contributing to societies. And of course, I mean, since COVID, we talk about it, to make our supply chain more resilient. I do believe in the past, due to this labor arbitrage, going for cheap energy and the like, and anyhow, we don't have a CO2 price, so therefore maybe energy is artificially high. I always say we polish the asymptote of our supply chain. So it's just in time, just in sequence delivery for automotive, for example. If something happens, I mean, you go to a full stop. And COVID showed us this is a hard way. And so therefore, that's something what we have to change. And there, actually, for me, these are two elements. Of course, it's the strategy that you think about your supply chain, how you diversify it, allocate it to different regions, countries. But then I'm a strong believer in technology to give an answer to that one. And it starts in the design phase. Eco-robust design gives you, from the very beginning, if you use the right tools, it gives you what we call a digital twin of a product, including a digital twin of the footprint, so of the CO2 footprint. Is it recyclable? And of course, you can also, in an eco-robust design, you will design in different suppliers. When we talk about combining the real and the digital world, because once you make it digital and you have a digital twin, then also of your manufacturing side, then you bring it to life, and then you control it also during the operational phase. Is the output really what you thought you would go in? Just one more word to make it more tangible. Let's talk about our trains, our Mireo trains, commuter trains. We do that. We design them virtually. We have a virtual image. They are using 25% less energy. They are recyclable to 95%. We can power them with an overhead line, but also with hydrogen or batteries if you want. And since we are running then in the operation phase with digital AI, we can basically guarantee 100% availability because we know which part is going to fail and when and why. So you can pull them off, repair them, and bring them back. This is very powerful. If you deploy that to our industries which we're serving, I think it's a very, very good answer to go forward, using less resources while still maintaining a higher growth, what I do believe we need.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. But in your industry, to what extent is this digital twin phenomenon happening? And what do you think is preventing companies from taking to it? I mean, as an idea, it sounds good.
So I'm looking forward to your answer too. But I see there's a strong demand, and you see that if you talk about our software business. I mean, our software and digital business is a 5.5 billion, growing with more than 10%. It's growing over proportional. So obviously, the customers are asking more for that. It's clear if you really want to maintain your productivity level, if you want to shorten your cycle time, there's no way other than going in this digital world and do whatever benefit you can get. The pickup rate so far can be even faster, and I think it's a combination of sometimes hesitating to invest, sometimes a lack of competencies, which brings me to one of the biggest topics which we have is education and training of people. Because a job on a shop floor on a fully automated line looks completely different than a job in a semi or non-automated line. This includes also our software engineers. They're using different tools which are going way beyond just drawing, make a 3D drawing. No? You really simulate whatever it does when you shake it, when you heat it, when you burn it, whatever, even the software running on a hardware. So education and training. And then last thing is, in most cases, when I see companies making a big step forward, it's driven from the C-level. It's a visionary CEO who says, I want to go digital, I want to do that, and then pull it off.
Yeah, absolutely.
How is it about Volvo?
Yeah, absolutely. We are utilizing that every day in the week. Otherwise, I should have given the wrong answer here. But no, I will come back to it, actually. I'll come back to it.
You can continue right away. I mean, you know.
No, but obviously for different reasons. I mean, both when it comes to the business models today, where we are moving from products and aftermarket services into solutions. And we need actually to replicate much quicker together with our customers and customers. And that we are doing in, so to speak, the digital twin world to see, okay, how does it work before we are actually deploying different type of solutions. So both for our internal efficiency, to shorten lead times, quicker time to market on our traditional business, but I think more importantly for the whole transformation actually, because that gives you completely different opportunities to interact with downstream, our customers and customers, but also very important for us with, as you know, Roland, also a very complex and important innovative supply chain network that gives our ability to capture their innovation force.
Yeah.
So in your industry, which involves so many firms, I'm keen to know what are the advances that have happened in recent years that excite you beyond digital twin or just
I mean, if you start with the bigger picture, as one of the world's biggest provider of commercial vehicle and construction equipment solutions, right? Of course, the big movement for us is all the positive effects about Paris. And in particular the science-based target movements. And the reason for that is obviously that now companies are stepping up, talking about, okay, what is their CO2 footprint, how does it look like, what is the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, and that is giving two very dynamic effects. First and foremost, we see that most sectors are coming pretty quick to transport and logistics and infrastructure and construction activities. And they're also coming to that by understanding that in order to abate CO2, start with transport and logistics is a pretty good deal. If you're in retail, for example, maybe 5-6% of your cost is logistics, but 40-45% of your footprint of CO2 is logistics. Right. So if you can abate that by even increasing it with 20%, that will mean 1% of your total cost base, taking out 40%. It's a pretty good equation, right? So that is by far the most important. That means that we are now connected. We have always talked about the ecosystem, but now the ecosystem is happening at scale, because what is my scope 3, and by the way, that's 92% of my footprint given supply, is someone else's scope 1, scope 2, or even scope 3. Yes. So we need, and we want to connect in this supply chain. And the other part of that is so important is this. It's a bigger cause, because another very important part in the supply is supply of talent. And if you want to be in the coolest industry in the world, you should be in logistics and transport, okay? And that means also that we are attracting a lot of talents. No, but it's true. No, but it's true. And the third thing about it is also that it is actually connecting different sectors.
Yes, it is true.
So I mean, what has been a traditionally extremely transactional industry, automotive and commercial vehicles, send out an RFQ, and we don't want to have any opinions, so you just answer to the RFQ, request for quotation, has completely changed. I see for Andrea Fodor is my executive when it comes to purchasing and sourcing. I mean, the most important tool we have now is not the RFQ, it's the innovation dialogue. And why? Because we need to have all our supply chain partners along this line. But we can talk more about that later.
Of course, yeah.
Great times ahead.
Yeah. Enrique?
Yes, I think that I would answer the question in a slightly different way. I think that what is most exciting about what is happening now is the fact that companies from almost every sector now have plans and have integrated sustainability as one of the key objectives. Each of us is doing it in a slightly different way because our businesses are different, but the definition of the problem is very similar. It's not only what energy do we use, it's how do we design our products, what materials do we use, where do we build our factories, what transportation, super cool technologies do we use, and this is really what has changed in the last year. And as we were talking before, the other important change is that in the past we were talking about goals for 2040, goals for 2050. The conversation has shifted now to what are we going to be doing next year? What is the plans that Volvo has to improve in the next 12 months? What is Siemens going to be doing in the next 6 months? What are we going to be doing immediately? That's what is, I think, important for the change. It's not a vision, it's things that are happening today.
I agree.
And here comes one interesting observation, talking about the timeline. It was written recently in an article, and out of whatever 160, 80 countries, maybe 2 of them are a little bit beyond 2030. almost all the others are sitting on 2030 with their carbon zero target. Take the same picture for industries, any kind of small and medium-sized company, big companies, all of them are targeting for 2030. So we are writing 2022 now, which is just 8 years to go. As we are approaching 2030, I think we can all imagine what happens, because none of them would really be gross zero. You might be net zero. That means any kind of offsetting or whatever. This would be really a huge pile which we're building up.
Right.
I'm wondering how that goes. Answer is move now and move fast.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Exactly.
Actually, tied to what you're just saying, I'm keen to ask you, like, it has often taken a backseat, the whole push towards sustainability. But can sustainability and competitiveness go hand in hand?
It's a clear yes, and for us, it's business. I mean, it started off in being part of a report, treated somehow in the aftermath of our financial reporting, and it sits now in the core of our strategy. Talk about buildings. I mean, we are automating buildings, building efficiency, and not only efficiency in automating them, but also making them using the full 9 yards of technology which you have. Is it heat pumps? Is it photovoltaic on the rooftop? Is it storage? Connecting that to a grid or even run it on a microgrid. The trains I was talking about, but the whole industry. I mean, at the former time, they just talked about how can I produce productive. Now it's about how can I produce more sustainable. And one of our customers, and we disclosed that, is Mercedes. They decided to build in Berlin the most modern, most automated, and most sustainable electric car assembly plant in the world, and have 2 Siemens, because we go for the full 9 yards. We go on the shop floor, we go for the buildings, and we also have an agreement to educate and train people, which is again a point which I believe cannot emphasize more.
But would this also be true for small and medium scale companies?
I think so. When I talk to them, they come back to us and ask us also, how can we support? It's very interesting. It starts really not in saying, okay, I want to deploy technology. It starts really, I have to make a plan. I mean, and it starts even before that. I have to create transparency. Where am I? You talked about the footprint, scope 1 and 2. In our case, 500,000 tons. We are low energy intensive for Siemens. Cut it by half already since 2015. The supply chain, so scope 3 upstream, it's 20 times more. It's more than 10 million. So and you see that pattern all the way through, also for small and medium-sized enterprises. So they want to create a transparency first. And once they have the transparency, then to make a proper plan to do that. While, and this is the point, I do not believe it's that you're impacting your competitiveness. I strongly believe you can increase your competitiveness at the same time.
Enrique, may I ask you, like from your position, how much of visibility do you have in the supply chains that are working with you?
I think it has become a critical need for all of us to understand our supply chains and understand the progress we are making. I think Arantxa said it very well at the beginning. We cannot manage this as a separate initiative. What most of our companies have done, we have integrated sustainability as part of our business initiatives. It's not something separate, because we are all convinced that it is not an or, it's an and. We need to be competitive in the future, we need to lead in sustainability. We, for example, publish every year our sustainability report. We have, in the report this year, we will share that in last year, we won more than $3 billion because of our sustainability practices. Because it's what Martin was saying, our scope 3 is the scope 1 for our customers. And they care about the sustainability programs we have, because we'll impact their programs, they will impact their initiatives. And we are winning business just because of sustainability. And this is only starting. We are convinced that this is going to be even more important in the future.
Great. Martin, you were going to say something.
No, but I think also, just to add to what has been said here, that I fully, support is also what we have learned during the last couple of years here. Is obviously, if you take trucks, for example, that's made to measure, built production equipment. A truck is not a truck. It's built for the specific purpose of the customer, right? That means enormous variety. It means a fantastic network of supply chain partners. And it's always the weakest link, regardless if you talk about the supply chain shortages that we have been facing now short term, or if you think about the mid and long-term execution of our strategy, right? That is a fossil-free transportation system. And that is something that we have learned now, that really continue to not only focus on the tier ones, but the tier 2, tier 3, both from a resilient point of view when it comes to visibility, volumes, commitments where they feel onboarded, but also when it comes to sharing the vision, so we can pull from the innovation capabilities of all these fantastic companies. I mean, we have a lot of SMEs, but they are sitting on huge capabilities when it comes to innovation power. And we have, for example, Camp X in Gothenburg, where we are sitting mixed with small, big supply chain partners that can make a difference for us. So I think a lot of things have happened over the last, not only related, because we relate everything to the pandemic and things like that, but since we have understood that you cannot do it alone, this is a system game.
Yeah.
We need to move from a brown to a green platform.
And maybe want to add, and I do believe the full transparency along the supply chain is a topic. It's a topic for big companies and for small and medium-sized in particular. We used our software portfolio and we developed what we call C Green, which is an extension to the supply chain, so which is a platform where all the data can feed in order to really make it fully transparent for your developers. So that means whenever you are designing a part into it, as long as the data are coming in, then you see really what your footprint is. And I think it's also in the context with SWEF, we brought to life Estanium, which is a community of companies who would feed in the data. Because if you have the data, then you really, and better it is, of course, and it's not trivial, I tell you, it's not trivial. Think about a manufacturing, if we manufacture a PLC, what's the share of energy going to that very same PLC, a part of the whole energy consumption for plant? So you really have to think about it, how to do that. Once you have it, you have full transparency, and then you can attack.
Right. On that point, Martin, we've discussed digital twinning and related issues, but is there a bigger role for technology to play in encouraging our push towards sustainable value chains?
Of course, I mean, without technology as a base, we will not be able to do it, both when it comes to the, so to speak, core technologies in the transformation, such as the whole electrification era, both when it comes to battery electric execution in our industries, but also when it comes to hydrogen fuel cell, electric vehicles utilizing the same modular platform when it comes to powertrain. But then, of course, it will be a lot of digital layers coming into this, because in order to create, we are moving from, as I said, to move from the brown to the green. The trick here is really to move at the same time, because otherwise it will be the chicken and the egg situation, right? And now, but this is the trick when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to certainty among customers, when it comes even to things, I mean, residual value, durability for the batteries, how long will they last, how should you think about it? And this will create an enormous network, and very similar to what Roland mentioned about, I mean, the development phase, it will also be in the operational phase, right? And here I think we should be more generous by sharing data also now as we speak, because that will allow us to move quicker, and we will end up with much less stranded assets, because we do it together when it comes to moving the platform. Then we should continue to compete on the new platform.
I think on the technology side, if I may, there is also the traceability of the value chains that need to be improved, and technology is a big means to do that. So what happens, I mean, the big problem that you all have, and maybe in your industries, is a little bit less of a problem, because you have very tight control over your entire supply chain, whether it's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. But if I think of textiles, if I think of food, which is much more atomized, the technology will be essential to trace what's happening below the tier 1. And to make sure that you do not find, take the food sector, that you've got labor conditions in your chain that are not, or in the textile sector, that are not the standards that the company has agreed to adhere to. So technology is a big part of the answer. And what I think is good now, frankly, but you will tell me whether you think otherwise, up until now, all of this was in the hands of the private sector. Private initiatives, private standards, multiplicity that made your life very difficult because you didn't know really which standard to respond to and to report to. Whereas now, at least in Europe, this is becoming public policy. Yeah. So you've got rules that everyone needs to adhere to. It's a bit more cumbersome, a bit more probably puts a little bit more pain on your quote unquote on your business, but it ensures a level playing field and greater transparency for all of you. So whether it's on traceability of value chains, whether it's on circularity, whether it's on barcodes and the rest, the legislation that is coming out of the European Union, in my view, is now going to provide you with one set of rules and a better level playing field.
Let me add to that, and I fully agree. The taxonomy, which we are talking about, is the right thing to do. I would give a little bit of a pre-warning because the grip on tier 1 is strong, on tier 2 is a little bit weaker. Tier 3, I don't know whether you have full visibility, and if you go to the mine, I think we lost. We are losing control. So therefore, and this is a big company. We have a lot of supply chain management people, I tell you. Small and medium-sized companies, if you really deploy the taxonomy full stream now, they do have a hard time to really comply completely with that. So I think it needs time to create this transparency. And therefore, yes, the right thing to do, but respect the timeline you need, because once you're signing your report, I'm in control, then you might have a problem. And this is what we have to avoid. On the other side, coming back to your point about integrity also of the supply chain, I mean, and you're fully right, when we talk about food and beverage, it's about from the farm to the fork, to have an integrity, what happened to your food, not only in terms of CO2 footprint, but what lands on your table. And this is something, we use blockchain technologies to do that. It's one way, one answer to it. It's a massive trend, you see that. Which includes then everything. It's what is the water consumption related to it? What kind of fertilizer you used and whatnot? And that's thing which technology can help. But again, you have to deploy it in an end-to-end way, which makes it a little bit complicated once you think the whole thing through.
And let's hear from Enrique on this issue as well.
Yeah, I think the point about reporting and transparency is fundamental. And it can be one of the biggest accelerators of change, because it's one of the major obstacles we find today. We report in a way, Roland will report in a slightly different way, another company in a different place will do it differently. It is hard to see how what type of progress is each company making. Having clear standards and forcing us to use them is fundamental, and actually something that from the public sector we have been pushing for. So we really welcome the help from the public side. We wish there is some coordination between the European Union and the US and some of the big governments, because if not, it will be complicated. But it's really something needed that we will welcome, because will help us really to make even more progress.
I totally agree with you. You know, we need to have these standards, you know, that all companies can buy and countries can buy into, you know, because otherwise the trade becomes so much more complicated. But let me turn to you again, and let me ask you for your ideas on what kind of public-private cooperation would you like to see coming after Davos or even in the future?
I think the most important one is probably what we were just talking, aligning on in the definition of what are the standards that we need to use to report, and forcing every company of every industry to use those standards, to those that are relevant, of course, to make sure that we use them to be able to compare and to track progress. That will be such an important area that I don't want to ask for more. Let's make progress there.
Absolutely. You know, I mean, there's so much of work to be done in this area.
Yes.
But Martin, Roland, can I draw your attention to this issue, like on public-private cooperation? Are there new initiatives that need to be taken?
Of course, I mean, there are a lot of them, and I think one that we are participating, that is the First Mover Coalition. That is how do we actually focus on a number of very critical supply chains in order to create the prerequisites in the private sector primarily, because it's a cooperation between different companies. We are, for example, I mean, on the fossil-free steel, we have seen good traction, but that will also require a lot of public-private partnership when it comes to the speed, as Roland was into here, 8 years from now, 2030. And when we see a lot of the enablers, the political and the public arena is very important. Permitting processes still being done in a way that is coherent, obviously, with all the requirements. But today, it just takes too long time. And how do we cope with that in order? Because I think there is a great willingness, and also we need also to integrate sustainability efficiencies into the competition law, because today it's only pricing efficiencies, which is good and important because we need to protect the consumers. But we should protect the consumers also in a sustainable way. And sustainability efficiencies are required for industries to cooperate on standards to lift the industry into new platforms. And that is today also an area, we have a number of processes ongoing for actually cooperation that takes too long time, basically.
Yeah.
We don't have the time to wait for that because we need to move. 2030 is around the corner. And we need to start to put sticks in the ground now. So there are, I think, more of that enabling factors than it's often a lot of talk about incentives and funding. I mean, you can have that for a short period of time. I'm not a big fan of that. I'm more fan of the enablers.
It's something that's going to be very hard to do. But Ronald, quick thoughts on this.
But necessary.
Let me add two dimensions. It's regulation and stimulation. On the regulation side, I fully agree. I mean, we have to get in sync. I mean, it cannot be that we are writing two reports, one for, let's say, the US regulators and one the European ones. It's meaningless. But also coming back to the big discussion about CO2, and since we're at WEF, we want to make a better planet. We have really joined forces. And I mean, one CO2 price would be a global one, would be a blessing, because then you really, and then you can start lifting it and find a way how to value for it. So it's dream, I know that, but actually we should have it in mind. That makes it much easier, which brings me to stimulation. Stimulation, we know that also running through COVID, obviously governments are stimulating, and this is great because all the stimulus money goes into the future, in the past. Yet you have to do it right. And for me, one lesson I learned over the years is stimulating money works best if you do not put it on technologies, but if you put it on outcome. I mean, what do you want to achieve? Is it, if you say you want to have a recyclability of whatever, 95%, then go for that. And if you want to have a CO2 reduction, then just raise the price and stimulate, give money where we achieve that. With one exception, if it's about new technologies, whatever you talk about, then we should, there's of course a first phase where you really have to go into research, less not near to the market, and there I do believe stimulus money has its justice. One last sentence and I come back to regulation, data. If you over-regulate data, we have another problem, because we just talked about, the whole thing goes about fully up the value chain and down the value chain, integrity of data in order to create transparency. If you're putting hurdles on it and not to share it, and because it's so difficult, you have another problem. So I would be a little bit more easy on that, respecting privacy data.
I'm going to draw in Arantxa on this point, especially.
No, I mean, I think what we need now is to put the regulators, not just of the EU and the US, but I would put the regulators in China and India in the same room together with the businesses.
Exactly.
Because at the end of the day, it's the businesses that need to tell the regulators, we do not want you to have a multiplicity of regulatory frameworks. Give us one, whichever you want, but give us one. I think the WEF has spent a lot of time putting the businesses around the table to discuss private standards. But now what we need is the public and the private, all the big guys, if you can get some of the smaller ones too, because part of the mines, etc., that you described are also in parts of the world that need to be around the table. One regulatory framework. Regulatory convergence, that's a bit the name of the game. And the sooner the better, because, you know, we set 2030 as the magic date for achieving results, but now we know from the last IPCC report that 2030 is already late. So back to your point, accelerating efforts is what we need, and I think what we need is frameworks that would allow for this acceleration to take place in a cooperative manner. One of the themes, and I land here, if you allow me, one of the themes here has been deglobalization and the risk of fragmentation.
True.
And I guess from what you've heard this morning, this is the thing to avoid the most. Because what I hear you say is that you've got your value chains all across the world. So we don't need a fragmentation. What we need is greater coherence, greater coming together.
Okay, sure, Martin wants to.
No, I fully support this. I think this is so important to underline. We have learned a lot about resilience, that we need to reinforce regional value chains for good reasons. It will also come with the price on carbon and a lot of different factors. But to continue to allow for a global supply chains, both for innovation and for really executing on the borderless challenge we have together on climate and biodiversity, we must continue to do so. And one thing that I've been a little bit afraid of during this World Economic Forum is that we have forgotten open in strategic autonomy.
Yes.
And for me, open strategic autonomy is a well-balanced phrase, because we understand that different regions need strategic autonomy in different shapes and forms. But the openness must be underlined in every conversation, to your point, so I just wanted to support that.
And if I may, I think the way globalization has been defined for the last 10 years, I think it's going to be changing in the next 5. And I think this is actually an opportunity from a sustainability perspective, because at the same time, we are going to be redesigning our value chains to be more resilient, which is something that we have learned during the last 2 years that we have to do, because in some areas we have exposures that we shouldn't have. Redesigning them is the opportunity to make them more sustainable as well. And the definition of globalization might be different, but this is a big opportunity we have now in the next years to really accelerate some of the changes that we have to do.
Arantxa?
One more point, and because you mentioned this strategic autonomy. I mean, I'm a little bit reluctant to use this autonomy word, so I would underline and boldface strategic, meaning it's only in those areas where you really need are vulnerable, where you should target for autonomy. Other than that, it's completely, exactly this open. Is, for me, the point is there. Look about Germany, for example. We will be forever, if you don't go for fusion or whatever, we will forever be an energy import country. Full stop. So how can we be autonomous? There are food import countries. Middle East is one of the largest food importers. They cannot be autonomy. So therefore, it's more the open and strategic part which is important then. And I think we are fully in line here.
Yeah, but also globalization is all about cooperation and collaboration. But let me turn to Arantxa. Beyond regulation, do you see a bigger role for governments in this particular area?
Look, I think governments have to set the right incentive schemes. That's what governments are about. They are not about telling businesses how they run their businesses. They are about setting the regulatory schemes, setting the incentive schemes, whether it's on the taxation, whether it's on the education. I very much agree with you that we've got a huge issue. Many of the value chains will require skills that we are not producing today, and thus are not producing today at the scale that will be needed. And that's where governments can be of enormous help working with businesses. So set the frame, set the right set of incentives. That's the role of governments, and then the rest is, and transparency and accountability, you know? Then you let businesses run. Accountability, transparency, so that everybody knows what's going on. I guess that's, you know, that's the rule.
Let me add one subject to that one. There's one exception, I would say, where I would require government to also get into the boat. If it's about securing critical supplies. I mean, rare earth, cobalt, nickel, whatever. Even if companies coming together, maybe others have 11 players or 12 players on the field, and we have only 10. So the government would be a very welcome, because the reason why I'm saying that, this is a very, very long-term strategy in order to supply, and I guess you know what I'm talking about. So joining forces here and also get a government engaged, because and very often it's about government relationships when you want to make a whatever 20, 30 years agreement on how to get access to certain critical
Absolutely.
commodities.
I'm just going to try and see if I can squeeze in a question or two from our audience here. Anyone? Okay. Please identify yourself.
Hello, Dan Biederman. I'm a social entrepreneur within the Schwab community and have worked on traceability and supply chains for a long time, including with HP. What a joy to see CEOs talking about the need for regulation to level the playing field. It's something civil society has certainly been talking about for a long time. one of the obstacles to faster, quicker, and more complete progress is your competitors. So you're all leaders. How are you going to bring the industry along?
Who would like to go first?
I think this is where government help is necessary. If there are clear standards that everybody needs to report to, it's not a matter of whether we do it and our competitor doesn't. This is why the definition of those standards is so critical. And if the standards are the same in every country or similar, even better to really accelerate the reporting.
And I think one example on that we have been engaged in that I think is just one very concrete example is, for example, the Global Battery Alliance and the Battery Passport. How can we make a standard out about utilizing the digital capability to follow the supply chain, both when it comes to all dimensions of sustainability, ethical, social, environmental, and economically distributed well, is an initiative that I think is absolutely necessary, not only for that supply chain, but that is very critical now since it's accelerating very quickly. So these type of initiatives and getting more and more on board, obviously.
We talked very much about, and I'm a strong believer in technologies, as you recognized already, deploying new technologies. I mean the whole technology stack, from the sensors over the edge to the cloud, which is combining the real and digital world, is for me the answer. I mean, you can take every industry up and down. Yet, along with that goes a change in mindset of how we define competition. And I'm about now to talk about the economy of platforms, multi-sided platforms. The more you give in, the better may you get out. And the more player you have, the more you get. Our business managers, they run businesses in a very clear way. Tier 3 delivers to Tier 2, to Tier 1, to OEM, and you to the customer. And everybody adds value, and this is how it goes. This breaks up. It will be a network. It will be multi-sided platforms. That includes competitors playing on a platform. Unfortunately, not all of our customers are using only Siemens PLCs. Still, we have to connect them to our solutions. So if we don't get them on board, we have another topic. So it's a little bit more open from that perspective. If you really want to pull it and scale and going fast, talking about 2030, there's no way around how to redefine also our business model, also in the context of competition.
I want to go back to what Enrique was saying a minute ago. Yes, we are in a new phase of globalization. Globalization was understood to be openness without many rules. And what we now know is that openness is a requirement, but that you need more rules of the game. And what is good now of this phase of globalization, at least from where I sit, is that we put these rules clearly on the map. Sustainability rules, rules to protect basic human rights, labor rights, rules to make sure that we've got more resilience in countries, resilience in businesses. So this is the new phase of globalization. So it's not less globalization, it's a globalization that is adapted to the times we're living, where we need also values embedded in business.
We have just a few minutes left. Do you think I can allow my panelists to say their final words? I'm sorry. So Martin, in 30 seconds, what action can our global community take to accelerate sustainable value chains? 30 seconds.
But first and foremost, I mean, that we have this conversation accelerated, I think is a very good sign, talking about all the opportunities we have with technology, but also that at the end of the day, it's about people sharing values where we want to go, utilizing those enablers. So partnership is the new leadership. I strongly believe in that. And I think there are a number of tangible initiatives coming out from a forum like this. Again, I would like to advocate for the first mover coalition. I think it's a great initiative. It's concrete in different sectors. So please join that.
Partnership is the new leadership. Enrique.
I think it's about action. We all have plans for the next 10 years. Now it's about what are we going to do, in 22, in 23, in 24, and really make sure that we use our companies as platforms, because we can do a lot of things internally, but we can be even more influential by influencing our suppliers, governments, and I think this is where change can really happen.
Absolutely, action and driving the change, especially making your companies the platforms. Ronald?
Well, I think the problem description is there. CO2 footprint, climate change, food supply, water shortage, and you name it. And actually technology brought us to the point where we are today. But it was not all bad, because we are living in a world, we are feeding almost 8 million people, and the portion of people who are living in poverty is lower than ever. Mm-hmm. So there's a good news too. However, going forward, in order to make that not worse, technology will be able, it brought us to the point where we are and will get us out. Technology
is the answer. Arantxa, for you.
So we're at the turning point, but we've got an opportunity to craft a new system that works on the basis of openness, more resilience, and works for all, for people and for planet, but also for prosperity. So that's the challenge. We can do it. To use the words of a famous German, wir schaffen das.
We need it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your comments. I think today's discussion was fascinating. There's a lot of work still to be done. I think sustainability has to start figuring in trade discussions. It has to start figuring in all the investment decisions that are being taken, just so that all of us can work together and push for a better future for all of us. Thank you so much for joining in today.